Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. I am Mr. Kadim Khan and I am a lecturer in the Institute of Computing, KUST University of Science and Technology. Today we will take lecture number 7 of the subject of Object-Oriented Analysis and Design, in which we will provide you the introduction about the Object-Oriented Analysis and Design. So this is the introductory lecture about the Object-Oriented Analysis and Design. This is the discussion agenda. It contains the topics of, first of all, we will explain what is an object, then the environment of the object. Also, we will explain the object orientation, and we will also explain object orientation and object oriented methods. So these are two different methods for representing the objects, the object orientation and object oriented methods. Then we have the object-oriented analysis and design steps. These are very much important steps in which the students will learn how they will perform the analysis and the designing of the object-oriented systems. Here we will discuss the sub-steps including finding objects, organizing the objects, describing how objects interact with each other, defining the operations of the objects. These are four different important steps while utilizing the object-oriented systems for analysis and designs. And at the end, we have the Java programming examples in which we will demonstrate how the object is used to call the functions in the class. What is an object? An object is a software code which contains the variable and methods. It means that an object is basically a piece of code which contains data types and the functions. The functions are used to process the data types, and we can call these functions which are used to process the data types through the objects. So as its name indicates that the object-oriented means that the system which are based on the objects. So in object-oriented technology, we instantiate a class through the objects. If we look around us, we can see many different examples of the objects. For example, animals, all kinds of the animals are the examples of the objects. Similarly, the desk, the tables, which are also the examples of the objects, the television sets, similarly the bicycle, similarly the car are also the examples of the objects. For example, if we are going to develop the online buying and selling systems, then the customer is one of the objects. Similarly, a product is an example of another object. So in the object-oriented system, software objects are modeled after the real-world objects in which they have states and the behavior. So there are two important properties of the objects. One is called the states and similarly another one is called the behavior. Now what is the state and behavior of the objects? By the states we mean the different variables which are implemented inside of the class, and these variables are the states represents the data of the class. For example, if a student is the object, then student roll number, student name, student marks are the examples of the states. And similarly, the behavior represents the methods of the functions related to the objects. For example, if we have a class students, then calculates the marks of the students or the total marks of the students is the example of the behavior, and the behavior represents the functionalities of the objects. Now this is the illustrations of the common visual representation of the software objects. Now here we have the full object, and the object contains the variables and the methods. The variables are used to store the data, while the methods are used to process the data and then produces some important informations. For example, if we have a bicycle object, then the bicycle has 10 miles per hour speed, 90 miles per hour RPM, that is revolution per minute, and fifth gear. There are five fifth gear bicycles. These are different attributes, are the data, are the states of the objects. While we have many functions are the behaviors of the objects. For example, the bicycles can change the gears. Means that if we want to change the gears of the bicycles, then we will say that this is in the first gear, or this is in the second, third, fourth, or fifth gear, so on. And the bicycles can also use different gears to stop. So brake is the, in fact, the behavior or the methods of the bicycle object. Also, the bicycle has the change condense behavior or the function. So change condense here means that changing the speed of the bicycles through performing certain pedals. So by changing condense, the rider can improve the speed of the bicycles when he or she wants to improve the pedals. Now the real world objects here shares two characteristics, that they have the states and they have also the behavior. Now here are another examples. For example, the student have state, the name of the student, gender of the student, age of the students. Similarly, uh, the 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 product also have certain name of the products. Then we have the price of the products, and then we have the expiry date of the products. And also the student have the behavior, for example, reading the books, writing over the books, and playing the certain games. Similarly, bicycle have the states, current gears, current pedals, cadence, two wheels bicycle, and number of gears in the bicycles. Similarly, we have the behavior of the bicycles, including braking behavior, accelerating behaviors, slowing down the behavior, and changing the gears behavior. Now these are different environments of the objects. Means that the objects is available with us into our daily life environment, and there are many representation or shapes of the objects. For example, floppy disk is one of the objects. It is used to store the data. So storing is one of the behavior of the floppy disk, and data is in fact the state of this floppy disk. Means that the size of the floppy disk. Similarly, we have the computer systems. Computer systems has the ability of performing certain operations or processing the data. So data is usually the state of the computer, and the behavior is that it can perform certain calculations, calculate the taxes, and calculate the total price, etc. through certain softwares. Similarly, we have a folder. Folder contains different files, and folder is in fact used to store the files here. Similarly, we have a certain games. For example, this is a game where we can perform certain search, and searching is different, is a state here. We have a telephone sets. Telephone set is used to dial the number. So dialing the number are is one of the behavior of the telephone set. Similarly, we have different foods here. The foods has certain colors, they have calories, and similarly food is baked here in the bakery. Similarly, we have the tea. Tea is hot. It is one of the state of the tea, but tea can be drink. So drinking is one of the behavior here. Similarly, the sleeping is also one of the behavior here. So All around us, we have multiple objects in our environment here. In object orientations, we have three different steps. And these three different steps are used to perform the analysis, design, and implementation of the objects. These three different steps form a big process of the object orientation. First of all, we have to perform the analysis here. By analysis, we mean the investigation of the problems. So, investigation of the problem defines the big scope of the problems here. For example, if we are going to develop the library management systems, first of all, we will identify the problems. Then, after analysis, we have to design the systems. By designing system means that we have to identify or develop the logical solution of the problem. After designing, we will perform the implementation. The implementation will be created from the design. And in the implementation, we will create the code here. Now, these steps are also provided here in different terms. In object-oriented analysis, we will investigate that the object-centric. This is the investigation that the problem is object-centric. For example, if we are going to develop the library management system, so here we will identify different objects and we will investigate that these objects are actually existing in the library management system. For example, librarian is one of the objects. Similarly, book is an important object here. Similarly, we have a reader or a student is another object here. So here we will identify different related objects of the problem. After object-oriented analysis, then we will perform object-oriented design. In the object-oriented designs, we will design the above problems into a certain tools, and then designs will be represented in the form of the logical solutions. So here the solution will be represented in the form of the interacting software objects. Then these objects will interact with each other. In other words, these steps will give us the unified modeling language patterns. So UML will provide us different representation of the object-oriented system in terms of the designing. And at the end, we have the object orientation programming. Here we will perform the practical code of the object-oriented systems that we have here first of all analyzed and then we have designs in the previous two steps. So in these steps, we will perform the object-oriented programming using certain high-level programming languages. For example, C++ is an object-oriented language. Similarly, Java and C# are high-level object-oriented languages. So here we will perform the coding in the object-oriented programming languages. Now, object orientation and object-oriented methods. Basically, these are two different same techniques used for analysis and designing of the objects. If we have a question that what is the object orientation and object-oriented methods, for example, C++, Java, and Oracles are object-oriented and object orientation methods. Now, these are used for system modelings. So, these are different techniques used for system modeling. Also, these techniques are used to manage complexity inherent in the analysis, design, and implementation. Basically, a software system has this complexity, and the complexity can be only killed through the analysis and designs of the object-oriented methods. So high-level language such as C++ and Java and similarly C# provides us to kill the complexity in the object-oriented systems. So object-oriented system enable us to divide a problem into multiple objects and then each and every object has a special sort of the data members and member functions. and that is defined by the analysis and designs and implementation of the system. Now, what is the object-oriented methods used for? Basically, the object-oriented methods are used for analysis and design of the systems. What are the features of object-oriented methods? The object-oriented methods provides us the integrated view of the hardware and the software. So means that the object-oriented methods gives us to link the hardware and software with each other. So the hardwares are used to use the softwares. So basically, the software provides us good useful informations, and these informations are in fact run through the particular set of the hardwares. How are they different from the structure? So how they are different from the structure, system analysis and design? So object-oriented analysis and design is different from the structure, system analysis and design because it provides methodologies of the system development. While the structure, system analysis and design methods do not provide us the methodologies of the development. So structure, system analysis and design methods provides us only overview of the system structures. For example, how different hardwares are arranged with each other to perform the operations. But object-oriented analysis and methodology provides us for the complete view of the system development, where there will be also the code structure of the system as well. Now, object-oriented analysis and designs can be performed using 4 different steps. These steps are in fact the parts of the software process, and this process is in fact defined by the object-oriented analysis and design methodologies. So these 4 steps can only be incorporated when we are using high-level languages such as C++, Java or C# languages. So using high-level language, we can in fact encapsulate the data and member function in the objects. So that's why these steps are used only for that particular sort of the development. The first step is the finding of the objects. Here we will identify different objects. Then we have organizing the objects. In the next steps, we will organize the objects means that the objects will be organized into different ways so that they can interact with each other. So here the organization of the objects makes us a sequential order of the objects. Then we have to describe how objects interacts with each other. Means that all different objects passes data from one object to another object. So here means that they will collaborate with each other through their passing the data as well as calling the functions as well. Next is defining the operations of the objects. Here we will define the functions of the objects, that what are the basic characteristics are the functionalities of the objects provided to the end users. Now here we will explain each and every steps in the detail. Finding the objects. Here we will identify different objects that are existing in the problems. So it is the natural occurrence of the entities or the physical objects. The objects are basically the entities are the physical components of the problem. For example, if we are developing a system which will identify your current locations of a person's, then here the person is one of the objects and location is the attributes of the objects. Similarly, Google Map will be another object as here. So it is the natural occurrence of the entities or the physical objects here. Also, finding the object means that the conceptual or abstract idea about the objects. Means that what are different objects that are related in the problem. For example, if we are going to develop the buying and selling systems of the products, so here customer is one of the objects. Similarly, the admin is another object. Similarly, the cash or the payment is also another object here. First of all, we have to define different classes of the objects, that whether it is the active or passive class. The active class means that the object is active and it is interactive, while the passive means that the object has no state here. It means that it is just a static object and it has no functions here. Also, we can say that the objects can be temporary, permanent, and persistent. By the temporary means that the objects can be deleted, while the permanent object is that object which cannot be deleted and it can be always be available for us. The permanents are those objects which are lies in the full life cycle of the problem. Well, the permanent data can also be deleted, but the permanent is always permanent. Also, objects have the properties of the part or as a whole. So, object may be the part or the whole represents that the object is the part of the problem or it is the whole problem. Similarly, also object can be generic or specific. By generic object means that this is an object which can be placed into any problems, while the specific object is that object which can be represented for only one sort of the problems here. For example, ATM is one of the specific objects. But we can say that the bank is a generic object, means that there can be many banks, but every bank has a specific ATM card. Also, the object can be private or the public. Private objects are that objects which whose data or member functions are already private and they cannot be accessed by any other objects, while the public object is that object which can be accessed by any other object as well. So the public object is that object which is the part of the public class, while the private object is that object which is the part of the private class only. The next step is the organizing the objects. So here we will define different relations of the objects with each other. Means that here we will organize different objects on the sketch, because that sketch will be used in the UML. So similarly, the object can be represented through the different object instances, and the similar object instances will be represented through the as a relation. The as a is a certain relation which gives us that this object is in fact another object. For example, we says that like crow is a bird. So crow belongs to the birds class. So these relations gives us the interaction relations between different objects here. Similarly, by organizing objects also means that we will define that whether it is the whole object or the part of the relations. For example, the whole or part of the relations can be defined through the has a relation. The has a relation gives us the generalization or the inheritance. For example, we say that the shape has a triangle, means that shape has different triangles. The third step is define that how objects interacts with each other. Here we will define different interaction of multiple objects in the systems. It is important that objects should collaborate with each other. So this can only be defined by the interaction of the objects. So object interaction, it means that identifies how objects fits in the systems. And the use of the scenarios unique situation is used for the interacting of the objects here. By the interaction of the objects means that objects are communicating with each other. That means that they are talking with each other. So there must be a communication channels in between different objects. Objects interfaces also define the interaction of the objects here. So object interfaces here means that how the objects are linked with each other so that they may be able to share the data and member functions here. Object interactions refines the objects. So already the refined relations are used for the interacting of the objects here. And the final steps is defining of the operations of the objects. The operations are in fact different behaviors of the objects which defines the functions of the objects, that what are the functionalities of the objects. So object functionalities, object implementation and testing of objects are all forms of the operations of the objects. So operations are performed by the objects including different behaviors of the objects. Here the specification interfaces and the external and internal functions are defined in the objects. Means that different interface classes that are interacting with objects and how these interface classes are called in our objects for the interaction. The external and internal functions of the object also define the operations of the objects. So objects with complex functionalities should be partitioned into multiple simple objects here. So if you want to resolve the complexity issues of the objects, then we have to partition different objects with the different functionalities. When the different functionalities are defined by the different objects, so then the complexity will be killed. And remember that one class has a unique objects are the functions. Now this is an examples of how creating the objects from a class. And also it is called the instantiation of the objects. First of all, we will declare the class names, then the object's name. The object name will be very much meaningful and all the variables rules will be applied over the objects. And then we have the object is equal to new class A. So here the new class is in effect constructor and the constructor is instantiated or called to the new operator. The new operator provides the memories to the constructor here. So here this object is instantiated here with the constructor of the class. Also we can instantiate the objects in one line as well, like class name, then the object name, then equal sign new class A. So here the object will be instantiated from the class A using the constructor of the class. This is the example of the C#.NET language for calling the function through the objects. In this example, we have instantiated the objects and then the object is used to call the functions of the class here. So first of all, we have declared the public class math class and this is the body of the class. So it is a public class and the name of the class is the math class. Then we have multiple functions inside of the math class. The first function is the sum function and its return type is integer and there are two integer parameters as well in the sum function. So int a, int b are two parameters which will be processed by this sum function and it returns the addition after two values. Similarly, we have the diff function. The diff function will calculate the difference of two parameters and these are also integer parameters and it has the integer return types. So it will return a minus b. Also we have int product function, int a comma int b. It will perform the multiplications and its return type is also integer. Now here we have the public static void main functions. This is the function which must be in every object-oriented languages and inside of this main function we have instantiated the obj of the math class. So by instantiating here we means that we have declared first of all maths class, then the object name and then equal symbol with, and also we have the new operator which gives the memories to the math class and we have the constructor maths class. Then Using this object, we have in fact called different function that we have defined inside of the math class. So this is the system.out.println, which will print the strings on the consoles. Sum of 5 and 6 is, then we have the concatenations operator, plus obj is the object name dot sum 5 comma 6. Obj dot sum 5 comma 6 will call the function sum, and it will provide the 5 and 6 as the parameters here, and the parameters will be transferred here in the body of the sum function, and it then will calculate the additions, and it will returns one values, which is the 11 here. Similarly, also we have called the diff functions through the objects object comma diff, and object dot diff 5.5 comma 2. So it will calculate the difference of 5 and 2, which is the 3. Similarly, we have also called the product functions. It will calculate the productivity or the multiplication 5 comma 2, 5 2s are 10. Also, we have the square root of 100, which is 10. Math dot square roots 100, which is 10. So square root of 100 is 10 here, and this is calculated through the square root function. But this function, you can see that it is not defined here. So because it is a built-in function, math dot square root, and math is the class of the mathematical operations here. Now, after calling these functions, the output will be look like here. Sum of 5 and 6 is 11, difference of 5 and 2 is 3, and product of 5 and 2 is 10. And similarly, square root of 100 is 10.0. So this is the C#.NET examples, which gives us how we can define the class and then instantiate the objects, and how we can call the function of the class through the objects. So dear students, this is the end of this online class. Here is the reference of the book, Object Oriented Analysis and Design with Application, 3rd edition, and it is written by the many authors, including Grady Bush, Robert A. Maxim Chuck, Michael W. Engels, Baby J. Young, and Jim Connell, Kelly A. Hostens, and Phillips Conrad, and Lee Toyley. So this is the in fact an image of this book. You can download this book, and you can read for this book for object oriented analysis and design with application. It is very much good books. Also, if you have any question, you can ask through the email. My email is m.kadim@kust.edu.pk. I will answer your email as soon as I get your emails. Thank you very much.